Welcome to Truman's Town Hall with your host, Matt Truman.
Hello. This is Matt Truman. Thank you for downloading this episode. Thank you for sharing with a friend. Hope everyone's having a good start to the Christmas season. Merry Christmas to you all. Now, there was a council meeting on Monday, and they left us on a cliffhanger. They did. They left us on the cliffhanger, and we're going to go into that a little bit later. But first, we need to travel back a couple of days to December 3rd and listen to just a little clip from the work session. Let's listen to it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Over the past 5 years, I believe the agreement totals roughly north of $135,000. And of that, before I would be comfortable, I would have to ask, what are the reasons we are not going out and looking at professional bids? You've mentioned some of the lifeguards, the accounting, and things of that nature. Are we as a city able to, comfortably say that the YMCA is a sole source vendor in this?
Yes.
Because honestly, if that's where we're at, then I would almost like to see that in the legislation.
It would be for sure.
Okay,
yes.
All right. Because that makes it a lot easier when I'm going back to my constituents and they're asking, why was that not put out to bid? Well, the YMCA is the sole source vendor in this particular project. Shuts that down.
Yes.
In my opinion.
All right. So we heard that. Mr. Shaw on December 3rd asked the city manager, is the Y a sole source vendor? The answer was yes. He also asked, can I see this in the legislation? And he said, absolutely. It will be in the legislation. Now, hear the city manager's answer to the question of, well, it's time to vote for it. I have the legislation. I don't see the Y being a sole source vendor in here. Listen to his answer.
And I believe that brings us to item 12E.
Item 12E, a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into that certain agreement between the City of Huber Heights and the Young Men's Christian Association, YMCA of Greater Dayton, for the management and operation of the Kroger Aquatic Center at the Heights at the First Reading.
Mr. Schomer, comments?
Yes, as we discussed previously, it is that time to consider the renewal in the existing agreement. It calls for the city and the YMCA to work in good faith for a renewal of the existing agreement, and that is what we have done. We feel that there are no significant modifications, needs or changes upon review of the YMCA. And what we've worked towards, we've had some great successes, and we look for continued successes. A couple I'd like to highlight are directly related to, ironically, a couple of presentations tonight. First of all, being able to engage some of our community residents, providing them training, such as we saw in the award provided to Mitchell tonight, is simply outstanding. And if you talk about community partnerships and engaging and reaching out the arms of what the city can offer the community, I think that's a great example. Secondly, regarding the Auditor's Award, one thing that wasn't mentioned is that the YMCA has kind of a separate division of an audit regarding the operations of the Aquatic Center, and they have to comply and fully understand all of the GASB restrictions, rules, laws, and all that for the Governmental Accounting and Standards Bureau for all of those regulations, and pass those with flying colors and really assist in both the efficiency and the effectiveness of the community regarding its financial transparency. So, in all ways, measures, it's a great partnership. It is again a continuation of the existing agreement that calls for that, and based on the requirements within. And without any further comment, I would ask that it's considered for adoption this evening.
And the work session recommendation was adoption. Mr. Morgan?
Move to adopt.
Motion and a second. Mr. Campbell?
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Mr. Otto?
A couple quick questions. Mr. Schomer, at the work session, Mr. Shaw had inquired, he had a question basically referring to, was it your opinion that this was a I'll say use the term sole source type of a situation, which you said you believed it was. He followed that by asking if that could be included in this piece. I didn't see it in there.
In the agreement, it actually calls for this renewal to occur under good faith between the two parties under the existing agreement. So it's more or less a renewal and extension of. Therefore, it falls within that because it was previously agreed to.
I don't correlate the two, but if that's your answer, that's your answer. The second question I had on the agreement was, is there I know that there's I'm going to call this my word, seed money each year, $25,000 that goes in. Recently, when we made up the operating loss up there, did that money that we paid that direction on that last piece, is that $25,000 included in that, or will we be seeing something else this coming spring or between now and the time it opens again to replant that seed money?
Yes, each year it is for startup for each part of the operational startup for each year.
So we will be doing that. We haven't covered that yet. That will be upcoming in the spring then, before they open.
For each year, yes, that's the way that's written in the agreement. Correct. So we have not done it for next year yet.
Right. That was my question. That hasn't been done yet.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So, and this is just for me. I'm putting it out just my thought. I think that when we consider not that I don't think a public swimming pool. I don't think things like a public pool, senior center, a community center, things of that nature. Just like parks, I don't think we should overly. We're going to expect losses, but just from a record standpoint, I think that the net loss would have to include that additional 25 because, we put that in last year and that's not still there. We got to replenish that again. I don't think that number's factored into that operating loss. And
it is for the 2019, but the next year payment of that wouldn't be factored in until the accounting and the budgeting for the 2020 year. So we're not going to show a payment that would be due the next year in this year's accounting and in records.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. I'll take that. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Questions? Okay, Mr. Rogers?
Mr. Shaw?
No.
Mr. Morgan?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mrs. Burge?
Yes.
Mr. Otto?
No.
Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Mr. Webb?
Yes.
And the resolution carries 5-2.
All right. So what we see there and what we heard from the answer was no, the YMCA may not be a sole source. It was just in the contract that we renew with them or that we look at them to renew with. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, there was a lot of wordsmithing there. A lot of spin, if you will. Just be honest with the people. No, they're not a sole source. We could send this out for a bid. However, we don't feel like we should do that because in the contract it says that the first look should be at the YMCA. Or whatever. But the YMCA is not a sole source to manage an aquatic center or a pool. That is not accurate information given to the people in the city of Huber Heights. And I haven't spoken to Mr. Otto or Mr. Shaw, but I would believe that part of their no vote, or I would think part of their no vote, was because of that. Because you're not sending contracts out to bid. We're giving no bid contracts to a lot of different people, and it's all by choice of what staff recommends. And that's fine if staff recommends certain things. But at the same time, City Council, it's your job to be stewards of the taxpayer's dollar. And if you're not sending things out for a bid, can you honestly say that you're doing a good job for the people of the city of Huber Heights? That's a question. Anywho. Another topic we have been following quite extensively here on Truman's Town Hall is the court building in the city of Huber Heights. Will it stay? Will it go? What happened? Why was there controversy behind it? Why would a council member be embarrassed by the shenanigans, quote unquote? Well, from my memory, I went to a meeting where there was a sitting judge discussing his campaign and discussing why the court building was in jeopardy. I was at that meeting. There was only, in my recollection, one other council member at that meeting, or one council member at that meeting. I was thinking maybe there was another one, but there was a different meeting and there were other council members too. But I think they came to that meeting because of the one meeting, I believe it was in October or September even. I think it was in September, where the Northeast Republican Club meeting happened at Frickers. The judge came, gave his stump speech, then included how he thought the city manager was not doing a very good job negotiating the deal to keep the court building in the city of Heber Heights. He initiated that. Because I don't know if anyone in that room knew there was that much difficulty keeping the court building in the city of Heber Heights. So, when you hear accounts, and I'm going to play this clip in a minute, the final vote for this, or possibly the final vote for this court building. We hope, right? You're going to hear a council member say, well, it's embarrassing that we had to go through all those shenanigans, because there was a big ordeal over this court building. And then you had council members upset that they heard the city manager wasn't doing a good job negotiating the deal. Then they looked into it. They inquired about why this was being said. And then there was allegedly a complaint filed and then withdrawn. And we'll go over all of that here in a minute. But here is the final vote and those questions being asked, and then we'll come back and talk about it, okay? Here we go. Final court vote.
Item 12F, a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute an extension of the current lease and negotiate and enter into a new lease agreement with the Board of County Commissioners for occupancy of the Montgomery County Municipal Court's Eastern Division building at the first reading.
And Mr. Schomer.
Yes, the extension won't be needed, I do not believe. The lease agreement, I believe that the language has been worked out. The county will be passing it on to their board, I believe the 17th, in final form. So this would allow us to approve it as it's written, to have that ready to execute upon their approval, and we see no obstacles in doing such.
Okay, thank you. And the working session recommendation was adoption. Is there a motion? Mr. Shaw?
Motion to adopt.
Is there a second? Mr. Campbell?
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Mr. Otto?
I just want to say I'm extremely happy to hear that we have, it seems, come to that agreement. I think that's a big save and a big win for our community, and thank you so much, Mr. Schomer.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Moore.
I would just like to echo Mr. Otto's comments and Mr. Schomer say, and to this council, I think it's embarrassing that we had to go through some of the public shenanigans that we did. And I'd like to encourage us to let our staff do their job and bring to us completed projects like this. Thank you, Mr. Schomer.
I agree. I may have more on that later. We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Okay. Mr. Rogers, call the roll, please.
Mr. Morgan?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mrs. Burge?
Yes.
Mr. Otto?
Yes.
Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
And motion carries 7-0.
7-0. So it passed. So essentially what just happened is they're going to carry over. There's an extension. They don't believe they're going to need it because on the 17th the county meets and signs off on it or votes for this deal. And that, what you just heard, that vote gives the city manager authority to sign off on whatever deal he feels necessary. or whatever deal they give him.